My sister accused me of hitting on her husband, but he exposed a secret that destroyed her life. The crisp, linen-scented air of the rented event hall was thick with the low hum of cheerful conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. It was supposed to be my day. After 4 grueling years, I had graduated from business school with honors, a milestone my parents had insisted on celebrating with a lavish party. Surrounded by proud family members and supportive friends, I should have been floating on a cloud of accomplishment. Instead, a familiar, heavy knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. The source of my anxiety was, as always, my older sister, Gina. At 26, Gina was a master of the universe, but only if that universe revolved solely around her. She possessed a gravitational pull for drama and attention that was as predictable as it was exhausting. Our entire lives, every conversation, every family gathering, had to be filtered through the prism of her needs, her achievements, her feelings. For the sake of my parents, who championed a fragile, superficial peace above all else, I had spent 22 years putting up with her insufferable, attention-seeking behavior. But as I stood there in my new dress, a tangible symbol of a future I had worked so hard for, I knew something was about to break. The party that my parents had meticulously planned was about to become the stage for a reckoning, and I was done playing my part. Our relationship, or the fractured remnant of what it once was, hadn't always been this way. But the sisterly bond we shared in childhood had long been eroded by her insatiable need to be the center of every moment. Every birthday of mine was somehow punctuated by a story about her. Every holiday was an opportunity for her to showcase her latest drama. She had a unique talent for steering any conversation, no matter how unrelated, back to the single, fascinating subject of herself. We'd had countless fights about it over the years, confrontations that always ended with me being labeled as too sensitive, and her being coddled by our conflict-avoidant parents. I knew she wouldn't change. I knew this party, a celebration explicitly for me, would be a direct challenge to her ego. I just didn't realize how far she would go to reclaim the spotlight. The party started smoothly enough. Relatives I hadn't seen in years congratulated me, slipping crisp bills into my hand and offering well-meaning but generic advice about the corporate world. My friends were a boisterous, happy bubble of support, their laughter a welcome buffer against the tension I felt radiating from the corner where Gina was holding court. She had already managed to gather a small audience, her voice rising above the din as she recounted some no doubt embellished story from her own life. I tried to ignore her, focusing on the genuine warmth of those who were there to celebrate with me. Then, just as my father was about to make a speech, Gina stood up, tapping her champagne flute with a manicured nail. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, her voice ringing out with a confidence that immediately silenced the room. For a foolish, fleeting second, I was stunned. A wave of hope, as naive as it was misplaced, washed over me. Maybe this was it. Maybe, for once, she was going to be the supportive older sister I had always craved. Maybe she was going to say something kind, something proud. I should have known better. She raised her glass, a malicious, triumphant glint in her eyes that I knew all too well. "To my little sister," she began, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that made my skin crawl, "who has worked so hard to get what she wants." The pause was deliberate, pregnant with a meaning that only I could feel in the pit of my stomach. "I just want to share a little story about my sister's ambition," she continued, her gaze sweeping across the confused faces of our guests. "A few months ago, while I was 6 months pregnant with my beautiful baby boy, I discovered that my ambitious little sister had been sending some interesting messages to my husband, Michael." A collective gasp rippled through the room. My own breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a grab for attention. This was a calculated, vicious attack. A character assassination disguised as a toast. She painted a lurid, entirely fictional picture of me as a shameless homewrecker, a woman of loose and questionable character who had tried to seduce her pregnant sister's husband. The details were vague, but the implication was clear and poisonous. The room was a sea of shocked and bewildered faces. My friends immediately started shaking their heads, muttering their disbelief. My parents looked utterly mortified, their faces a mask of horror and confusion. They, along with everyone else who truly knew me, knew how absurd, how utterly out of character her accusation was. They began to stand up, to shout her down, to defend my honor. But it was my brother-in-law, Michael, who had the most profound reaction of all. He had been standing beside Gina, a look of pure, dumbfounded shock on his face. But as she spoke, as she spun her web of lies, his shock slowly morphed into a look of cold, hard realization. He held up a hand, a silent, commanding gesture that quieted the rising tide of outrage. He took the metaphorical stage from his wife, his expression a grim, determined mask. He was about to set the record straight. The incident Gina was so dramatically misrepresenting had been, in reality, the most mundane of interactions. A few months ago, knowing that Michael worked as a financial consultant, a field I was considering for my own career, I had sent him a single, professional message on LinkedIn. I asked him a few basic questions about his line of work, about the pros and cons, about the career trajectory. It was a formal, brief, and entirely professional exchange that lasted no more than 5 messages. That was it. He had, like a good husband, mentioned the conversation to Gina. And in her toxic, insecure mind, my simple career query had been twisted into a sordid attempt to steal her husband. She had held onto this fabricated grievance, nurtured it, and had now chosen to detonate it at the most public, most humiliating moment possible, all to reclaim her position at the center of the universe. Michael, his voice steady and clear, calmly explained the true nature of our conversation to the silent, captivated room. He held up his phone, showing the bland, professional messages to our parents. Then he dropped the real bombshell. He explained that he had originally planned to keep his own painful secret quiet until after my party. He hadn't wanted to steal my thunder, to mar a day of celebration with his own marital drama. But now, since Gina had so brazenly and publicly attacked my character, he felt it was only fair to shed some light on hers. The atmosphere in the room, already thick with tension, became electric. Gina, seeing the tide turn against her, began to lose control, her face contorting in a mask of rage as she started screaming at him to stop. But Michael was a man on a mission, a man who had clearly reached his breaking point. He ignored her shrieks and continued, his voice ringing with a cold, righteous fury. He announced to our stunned family and friends that he had, just the week before, received the results of a paternity test. And just 2 days prior to my party, he had learned, with absolute certainty, that the baby his wife was carrying was not his. The silence that followed was absolute, a deafening void where the only sound was Gina's ragged, hysterical breathing. Michael then recounted the story of his own dawning suspicion. A work party a few weeks ago, where he had noticed Gina's overly familiar, flirtatious behavior with a particular male coworker. It had planted a seed of doubt, a seed that had prompted him to do the unthinkable. He had gone through her phone while she slept. And there it was. A long, incriminating thread of flirtatious, intimate texts, a digital record of her betrayal. He had ordered the paternity test the very next day. He explained, his voice thick with a raw, wounded emotion, that his initial plan had been to confront her privately after my graduation party. He had respected me and my parents too much to detonate his own life in the middle of my celebration. He knew how much effort and money they had poured into this day, and despite his own heartbreak, he had not wanted to punish us for his wife's sins. But now, with the party already in ruins, with my name already dragged through the mud, he saw no reason to protect her any longer. If she was so determined to make a scene, then she would be the star of it. We were all speechless, frozen in a tableau of pure, unadulterated shock. Gina was now openly sobbing, her carefully constructed facade shattered into a million pieces. Michael didn't even look at her. His speech delivered, his truth unleashed, he walked over to me, handed me a beautifully wrapped gift, and offered a quiet, sincere congratulations. And then, without a backward glance, he walked out of the hall, out of the party, and out of his marriage. For a few long, agonizing seconds, no one moved. We were all suspended in the surreal, chaotic aftermath of his revelation. And then, a wave of pure, white-hot fury, the culmination of 22 years of suppressed anger and resentment, washed over me. This was all her fault. My day, my celebration, my moment. All of it ruined by her selfish, pathological need for attention. I don't know what came over me. Some primal, long-dormant instinct took over. I marched over to where she stood, still sobbing her crocodile tears, and I grabbed her by the arm. "This is your fault," I screamed, my voice a raw, unfamiliar sound in my own ears. "You are an attention-seeking, worthless bimbo, and I want you out of my sight. Now." I was furious that she had taken this day, a day that was supposed to be a testament to my hard work and dedication, and made it all about her lies, her drama, her sordid little life. It was a pattern, a toxic, suffocating dance we had been engaged in our entire lives, and in that moment I knew, with a terrifying clarity, that I was done dancing. I tried to drag her toward the exit, but she resisted, her body going limp. "You can't kick me out," she shrieked through her tears. "My parents paid for this. I'm not leaving until they tell me to." Her defiance, her unmitigated gall, was the final spark on the powder keg of my rage. In the heat of the moment, with years of frustration and hurt fueling my actions, I did something I never thought I was capable of. I slapped her. Hard. The sound echoed in the suddenly silent room, a sharp, ugly crack that seemed to shock even me. Her glasses flew off her face, skittering across the floor. But I didn't stop. I was a dam that had finally broken, unleashing a torrent of pent-up fury. I hit her again and again, a blind, mindless rage, until my friends, their faces a mask of horror and concern, rushed forward and pulled me away. They half dragged me to a quiet corner of the venue, their hands firm on my shaking arms, their voices a low, soothing murmur as they tried to bring me back from the brink. The rest of the evening was a blur. The party, irrevocably tainted, came to an abrupt end. My parents, their faces a grim, embarrassed mask, sent the remaining guests home with hastily packed containers of food. The drive home was a cocoon of tense, suffocating silence. When we finally pulled into our driveway, my parents turned to me, their voices not filled with concern for my emotional state, but with a cold, clipped disappointment. "We can't believe you," my mother said, her voice trembling with what I realized was not sympathy but shame. "Both of you. You humiliated us tonight." "And you," she said, her eyes fixing on me. "I have never seen you act like such a psycho in my life." I tried to defend myself, to explain the years of provocation, the final, unbearable straw of her public accusation. But they weren't listening. "It doesn't matter," my father said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You let your feelings get the better of you. You behaved in a way that was completely unacceptable, and you embarrassed this entire family." The injustice of it all was a bitter pill to swallow. After years of being the good daughter, the one who kept the peace, the one who swallowed her feelings to protect their fragile sense of normalcy, I was now being blamed for finally, inevitably, breaking. I understood their embarrassment. But what they didn't seem to understand was that this meltdown, this ugly, public explosion, wasn't just a reaction to one night. It was the result of a lifetime of their own making, of their refusal to address the poison in our family, of their constant, implicit demand that I be the one to absorb it. In the days following the disastrous party, a Cold War descended upon our house. My parents, while not outright hostile, treated me with a distant, disappointed civility that was almost worse than anger. They were polite, but their conversations were superficial, their interactions carefully devoid of any real emotion. They were, in their own way, punishing me for shattering their carefully constructed illusion of a happy, functional family. I, in turn, retreated into a shell of hurt and resentment. I spent hours replaying their words in my mind, the accusation of being a psycho, their complete dismissal of the years of provocation I had endured. A part of me, the part that had been conditioned from birth to seek their approval, felt a familiar, sickening pang of guilt. Had I gone too far? Was my reaction, my physical assault on my sister, truly unforgivable, regardless of the circumstances? But the stronger, more defiant part of me, the part that had been slowly, painfully forged in the fires of my sister's lifelong campaign of emotional terrorism, knew that this was not entirely my fault. My parents, in their obsessive quest for peace at any price, had created a pressure cooker environment. They had consistently and systematically invalidated my feelings, dismissed my concerns, and forced me into a role of silent endurance. They had, in essence, handed Gina the matches and the gasoline, and then expressed shock and disappointment when I was the one who finally got burned. For days after the party, the silence in our house had become a suffocating, unbearable weight. I knew I couldn't let it fester. I found my parents in the living room, engaged in a stilted, joyless game of Scrabble, a pathetic attempt at normalcy. I sat down opposite them, my heart pounding, and I told them we needed to talk. I laid it all out, my voice surprisingly steady. I told them about the years of being Gina's emotional punching bag, about the constant, subtle and not so subtle ways she had undermined me, belittled me, and sabotaged my happiness. I reminded them of the countless times I had come to them for help, only to be told I was being dramatic, that I needed to be the bigger person. I told them that their constant expectation that I suppress my own feelings for the sake of a false family harmony was not only unfair, but had been deeply damaging to my own sense of self-worth. "You should have seen this coming," I said, my voice finally cracking with the weight of it all. "You knew what she was like. You knew she was pushing me. And you did nothing." So, when I finally snapped, when I finally stopped being the good, quiet daughter, you have no right to act surprised or disappointed. I saw a flicker of something in their eyes then. Not anger, but a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. For the first time, they seemed to be truly hearing me, not as the troublemaker, but as their daughter who had been carrying an impossible burden for far too long. My mother's eyes filled with tears, real tears this time, not the manipulative kind. "We're so sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with a genuine remorse I had never heard from her before. We didn't see it. We were so focused on keeping things calm, on avoiding fights, that we didn't see how much it was hurting you." My father, a man of few words, simply nodded, his own expression a mixture of shame and regret. They admitted that in their fear of conflict, they had become too focused on their public image, on maintaining the facade of a perfect family, and that in doing so, they had sacrificed my well-being. They confessed that in the days since the party, after the initial shock and embarrassment had worn off, they had been forced to confront the ugliness of Gina's behavior and their own complicity in it. They admitted, failed me. They had also, they told me, had their own confrontation with Gina. They had demanded that she issue a public apology to me and to all the guests for her despicable behavior at the party. Gina, in true form, had refused, turning the tables and painting herself as the true victim. She had claimed that I was the one who had humiliated her, that I was lucky she hadn't called the police and had me arrested for assault. She had even dredged up old, fabricated grievances, accusing them of always favoring me, of treating me like the golden child, a claim so laughably false it was almost insane. The fight had ended with my parents finally, after 26 years, drawing a line in the sand. They told her that until she was willing to take responsibility for her actions and issue a sincere apology, she would not be invited to any future family gatherings. They were done with her drama. They were done with her lies. They were done with her. The relief that washed over me was so profound it was almost dizzying. It wasn't just about the apology or their validation of my feelings. It was the tectonic shift in our family dynamic. The enablers had finally stopped enabling. The balance of power had finally, irrevocably shifted. The news of Gina's own life imploding came a few days later. Michael, true to his word, had served her with divorce papers. He was seeking full custody of their infant son, and given her public display of instability and her proven infidelity, he had a strong case. She was, according to my parents, in a full-blown panic. Her friend, with whom she had been staying, had asked her to leave. She had nowhere to go. And so, inevitably, she had called our parents, begging to be allowed to move back home. My parents, in turn, called me. They were torn. On one hand, they were furious with her. On the other, the thought of their daughter and their infant grandson being homeless was more than they could bear. They asked for my advice, a gesture that was in itself a monumental step. I could have been petty. I could have told them to let her suffer the consequences of her actions. A part of me, the wounded part, wanted to. But then I thought of her baby, an innocent child caught in the crossfire of his mother's destructive behavior. He didn't deserve to pay for her sins. Let her come home, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Do it for the baby. My mother started crying again, this time with gratitude. She told me she knew I would say that despite everything, I was a good person with a good heart. And in that moment, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time, a sense of hope for my own fractured family. The path forward is not clear. My relationship with my parents is still fragile, a delicate thing we are slowly, cautiously rebuilding. My relationship with Gina is, and likely always will be, non-existent. But the truth is finally out in the open, the toxic secrets finally exposed to the light. And for the first time, it feels like we might actually have a chance to heal.